It ain't no secret that in NieR, Project Gestalt was something less than a stunning success. I mean, a highly experimental, largely untested experiment to separate human souls from their bodies for an extended period of time? What could go wrong, right? Well, hindsight's 20/20, so turns out a lot of things can go wrong. The question is, why did it turn out this way? Was it poor planning, bad luck, or maybe a little sabotage from within? In this video, I'm gonna do my best to explain what happened to Project Gestalt, how it happened, and why it happened. This video is the second in the quote lore series, and it's a pseudo-sequel to my last lore video, where I went over the events of the NieR world prior to the start of the game. I'd say you should watch it beforehand, because I'm going to skim over a lot of the events that I already covered, but I think this video stands on its own pretty well, so ultimately, it's up to you. Also, same deal as last time, all this stuff happens in books and drama CDs, so I'll match what I'm saying to the gameplay as best I can, but some of it's gonna have to be unrelated clips.
Goddamn book.
Anyways, with that out of the way, the history of Project Gestalt begins about a full decade after the events of Drakengard's Ending E, so let's dive right in. Oh, and, big spoilers, yeah, obviously. In the NieR universe, around the year 2014, as WCS was spreading explosively across the globe and the Legion was gaining ground, things were looking pretty dire. Taking the fact that it was a pretty reasonable possibility that humanity could face its end if nothing was done, it was around this time when research into Project Gestalt began in earnest. I've got what I think is a relatively large proportion of German viewers, so y'all can blow me out if I completely butcher this next word, but I'm gonna give it a shot. The process of removing a human's soul from their body through Maso was called Gestaltisierung, which, according to Google Translate, means design. Okay, let's see how I did.
Gestaltisierung.
Not bad, I think. The original short-term separation experiment was a success. Some brave test subject's soul was removed from their body, and later reunited with no obvious issues. Great, this was a huge step in solving the whole maybe going extinct issue, but the problem is that it was just that. A step. Sure, they can be reunited after like 20 minutes have passed, but what about 20 days? 20 years? Even longer? That, and human bodies are kind of fragile, relatively speaking. You can't just gestalt them, shove them all in a warehouse for 1,000 years, and then expect them to still be there like some kind of meat-based wine cellar. No, it was clear this problem was far from solved. About a year after the first experiment was successfully completed, Project Gestalt was formally announced to the public, and ended up facing a huge backlash. Probably rightfully so. Ultimately, this is fiction, and we have context for the full events of the story, so it might be difficult, but try to put yourself in the shoes of some average person in the NieR universe. The world is falling apart around you, you're just holed up in your apartment playing Breath of Fire 4, hoping you don't breathe any white magic dust and turn into a Legion monster. And then some scientist shows up and says, hey, let's rip your soul out your body. How long? We're not sure. Can you put me back? Probably, but no guarantees. What are you gonna do with my body while I'm gone? Good question. Right, I'll take my chances with the Legion then. If you ask me, the load was blown on Project Gestalt way too early. The scientists might have been overly excited, as this was a big step in ensuring humanity's survival, but it was clear that there were still a ton of kinks to work out. Step 1 was figuring out what to do about the whole abandoned bodies thing, so after about another decade of research, the first replicant was created in the year 2025. The replicant system was soon integrated into Project Gestalt, and the two basically became one and the same. So a replicant is basically a genetic copy of the person undergoing the Gestalt process. While it might be tempting to think of them as androids, that's not exactly the case. As is shown by NieR during the game after the time skip, they can clearly age, grow old, and die. This isn't really a problem, as when they do die, the observer androids such as Devla and Popla can recreate them from their Gestalt, assuming it hasn't relapsed. They also can't reproduce, but Devla and Popla found a workaround for that. Since replicants have no concept of what the reproductive cycle looks like, DMP can just call them over, tell them congrats on the kid, hit him over the back of the head with a baseball bat to put him to sleep for a bit, then they wake up to a brand new baby. With all this considered, Project Gestalt could theoretically be continued indefinitely, solving the whole time problem. Anyways, this is all jumping ahead to stuff that happens after the replicants gain sentience, so let's pull it back a bit. The main takeaway from this sidetrack is while replicants aren't exactly human, they are biological in nature, at least more so than androids. Over the next 7 years, the Gestalt and replicant process is refined and designated as kind of a last resort option, while the armies of the world continue to fight the Legion. After the defeat of Red Eye in 2030, there was some hope that Project Gestalt would end up being unnecessary, but this wasn't the case. Despite the fall of Red Eye and the loss of coordination in the Legion's forces, WCS was still spreading at an unstoppable rate. Actually, even quicker now that fewer people were dying directly from Legion attacks. In 2030, Project Gestalt is once again shown to the public, this time with the replicant system thrown into the mix to garner support. Shit was a lot more dire at this point in time than it was in 2015, so ultimately, people went along with it. The only issue was, gestalting a human being and providing a replicant for them was a time-consuming, resource-intensive process, so progress began incredibly slowly, with priority given to who else but the rich. So, in case you haven't caught on yet, the theme of Project Gestalt has pretty much been, let's figure shit out as we go. At this point in time, reuniting a Gestalt and replicant is an extremely precise, hand-done process that requires specific, specialized equipment and is almost as difficult as separating them in the first place. This, obviously wasn't gonna fly once it was clear this no reuniting till the world is completely free of Maso thing was gonna be a long-term process. That brings us to the short story called And Then There Were None. In summary, it goes a bit into Grimoire Weiss's backstory and how he became a New York Times bestseller. He was a soldier in one of the Crusades, which, for a quick refresher, was a group of teenagers pumped full of Luciferase to fight the Legion. After a quick battle royale with 12 other soldiers, Weiss and NieR come out on top, with NieR getting that victory royale, and they're turned into grimoires. The plan being that when Project Gestalt is completed, the energy released from two grimoires being activated at the same time would force snap every Gestalt into their replicant body at the same time. There actually is one more grimoire featured in the game, the one you fight with in Emil's library, Grimoire Rebrum. Grimoire Rebrum? I don't know, I don't speak Latin. She was a girl that Weiss was friends with when he was still human, but losing the battle royale meant that her role in the story would be cut short. So just to recap, Weiss used to be some child soldier before he was turned into the book we know in the game. Anyway, so far so good, right? Project G had a few knots to untie, but the time problem thing and the unification problem thing have been resolved. Anything we're forgetting here? Oh, right, the Berserk thing, right. By the way, from this point on, the people running the show at Project Gestalt are known as the World Purification Commission, so I'll be referring to them as that. In 2050, a Devila unit, no confirmation if this is our Devila unit, made a certain discovery. This information can be found on the NieR Replicant Drama CD. Now, look, I'm pretty certain I've figured out how YouTube copyright works regarding music, gameplay, and all that. As for CD audio character voices, now, that's some uncharted territory. Gonna play a few choice clips, but I mean, if it's not kosher, I've probably cut out this part of the video entirely, so if you're listening to my voice right now, there's a good chance you'll be listening to Devilas in about 5 seconds.
ゲシュタルト計画進捗状況暫定報告項1レプリカントシステムの研究進展についてゲシュタルトからレプリカントにデコードした際の生体エラーも 1% 以下に抑えることができ自我崩壊の抑止も確認された項2崩壊体とオリジナルゲシュタルトについてある一定の期間を経過したゲシュタルトは7割以上の確率で人としての自我を失い、レプリカントとの統合も失敗してしまうのだ。人格を失ったゲシュタルトは崩壊体と呼ばれ、レギオンと同様に人を襲う存在となってしまう。
Few things to note here. The replicant's consciousness was supposed to be confirmed destroyed. This was a known problem, but we all know that didn't end up happening. This was likely a result of poor planning and the overall rush nature of the project. Sure, replicant consciousness was destroyed now, but within the next 1,000 or so years, there probably was no measure in place to stop it from resurging. 1,000 years ago, some Saxon was doing asymmetrical aquatic tactical operations, and humanity was still figuring out doors that swing open. So, what I'm trying to get at here is that it would be difficult for the scientists behind Project Gestalt to predict what exactly would happen in the next 1,000 years down the road. Ultimately, there was a bigger, more immediate issue. There was a high likelihood that most Gestalts would relapse and become, quote, similar to the Legion, which is why, despite the Legion being wiped out, many people thought that the relapsed Gestalts were then making their return. Well, they had already Gestalted a significant number of people, and I don't think they were in a position to offer refunds. What would be necessary is someone with a unique genetic code that was resistant to relapsing, and if that could be found, they can mass-produce a method of preventing other Gestalts from relapsing as well. So the plan was to pass out a bunch of replicas of Grimoire Noir out to the general population along with rations. Touching this book would either A, cause an immediate Gestalt relapse for the vast majority of people, or B, give them an extreme amount of power in the case of the one touching it being the quote, original Gestalt. This is where our protagonist comes in. He was given a copy of the book and watched everyone around him who touched it relapse. This is why he was constantly telling Yona not to touch the book in the intro sequence to the game.
Don't touch that book. Not ever. Got it?
The pair take shelter in the store to escape the relapsing Gestalts while NieR stands watch, but we know how the rest of this goes. Faced with the choice of being third-partied by a gang of rampaging Gestalts or touching the book, he went with the book. And wouldn't you know it, turns out he's the original Gestalt. He fights off the shades, but in the chaos of the battle, Yona touches the book, causing an immediate relapse. Side note, don't know if I'm the first to notice this, but when you beat the boss shade in the intro battle, NieR levels up to level 30. This is the approximate level you have to beat him at the end of the game. The more you know. The intro ends with NieR calling out for help, and him and Yona are quickly discovered by the World Purification Commission. They immediately put Yona on ice to stop her from relapsing, in exchange for NieR becoming the original Gestalt and cooperating in stopping the relapsing issue. He accepts, obviously, but I gotta wonder how they plan to convince him if Yona hadn't touched the book. Speaking of Yona, it's not looking good for her right now. While they can slow her relapse down for a yet undetermined amount of time, their attempts to stop it have all come up short. At first, they decided to keep this from NieR, but he was getting increasingly, quote, unstable over the lack of development from his sister. After about 5 years, they revealed to him that this wasn't going too well, but they did promise a solution would come up any day. That is, until the head doctor gets a call from what's left of the government. Treating her would be impossible. Yona's only, extremely slim chance of pulling through would be the successful completion of Project Gestalt and the mass reunification with the replicants. That, and this process was officially estimated to take about 1,000 years. The head doctor was given a choice: coerce NieR into cooperating for the next 1,000 years, or they'd take steps to remove Yona from the equation. The doctor does his best to try to put a positive spin on it, even hiding the fact that none of this is guaranteed and her chance of survival is slim at best, but NieR obviously doesn't, take the news very well. No matter what, NieR's cooperation is essential. Without him, the entire human race is doomed. So the World Purification Commission was willing to bend and sugarcoat the truth as much as necessary. NieR agrees to these terms, and the 1,000+ year power gap between the intro and the main game begins. In this time frame, the Mosso remaining in the world has been completely cleaned up, allowing the Gestalts to, theoretically, be able to return to their replicant bodies. Let's put this into perspective for a second. Unrelapsed Gestalts are pretty sentient. Some are violent, yeah, but most are probably pretty hyped that they get to finally return to their bodies and be human again. They spent the last 1,000 years or so in limbo, looking forward to the day they could rebuild humanity, only to be screwed over because their meat suits started believing they were people or some shit. Now picture your NieR. This NieR, not that NieR. You've been holding this whole thing down for over a millennium, because some guys in a lab coat told you it was all gonna be fine. But it's not fine. It's far from fine. I mean, everything's falling apart. And now, you're given more orders by these observer androids. Fuse Grimoire Weiss and Grimoire Noir to snap every Gestalt into their replicant bodies and complete the project. After figuring out the sole reason he continued to support the project for over 1,000 years was a lie, you can bet that NieR wasn't too enthusiastic about taking more orders. All that being said, there was one final straw. One thing that broke the camel's back. Take a guess at what it is. Think about the circumstances surrounding the beginning of the game. I'll give you 5 seconds. Alright, you got it? Yeah, you got it. It's Yona, isn't it? The game kicks off shortly after Yona gets the Black Scroll. And that ain't no coincidence. Her relapsed Gestalt, despite being put on ice, is running out of time. NieR is running out of time. So, he understandably goes off script, kidnaps Yona, and intends to stick her Gestalt back in its replicant himself. He turns his back on Project Gestalt, but not necessarily the goal of the project itself. Yona is his priority, but if the fusion of the grimoires happens along the way, that's fine too, which is why he didn't face any intervention for his actions from NieR or the observer androids. My biggest piece of evidence for this is a conversation Devila and Popola have on playthrough C that's new to NieR Replicant version number blah 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 blah. They plan to leave him be, as long as his goals still aligned with theirs, but if he started going too far off the rails, they plan to use Louise, the mermaid boss also new to the game, as a backup plan to take him out.
懸念があるのなら払拭しておかないと。もし魔王が計画に背くようなら、あの子の力で制さなければいけないのだから。ああ、わかってるさ。心配性だな、ポポルは。
It would end up not mattering, however, cause Replicant NieR killed Devila and Popola, and the Shadow Lord, effectively dooming both Project Gestalt and humanity. It's at this point where I gotta wonder if things could've gone differently. Had Gestalt NieR played along, not kidnapped Yona, and not sent Replicant NieR on a half-decade-long path of revenge, could Devila and Popola have convinced/tricked a younger, less rage-fueled NieR into fusing Vice and Noir? Would Yona have survived if Gestalt NieR just followed the plan? We'll likely never know. With the Shadow Lord's death, Project Gestalt was completely buried, and humanity had no choice but to slowly die out as Gestalts began relapsing one after the other over the next few centuries, taking their replicants down with them. Anyways, that's it for today. Next video in the hashtag series will be one going over all the events that happened between NieR Replicant and Automata, so check that out when it drops. Till next time.